On February 17, 2026, scientists published the definitive analysis of an event that shook one of the most visited places on Earth. And what they found, buried in the data, changes everything we thought we knew about the hidden threat lurking beneath the Mediterranean. The volcano the world doesn't know about is already waking up. 7 kilometers from Santorini, 500 meters beneath the surface of the Aegean Sea, a volcano called Colombo has been quietly filling with magma for the last 375 years. No headlines, no warning signs visible from the beach, no postcards, just molten rock accumulating in the dark, year after year, at a rate of 4 million cubic meters per year. That is the equivalent of 500,000 Olympic swimming pools of magma, and it has been growing since 1650. Most people who have ever set foot on Santorini have never heard its name, but scientists have. And on February 17, 2026, the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research published the definitive study of what just happened beneath these waters. What they confirmed is more alarming than anything the monitoring systems were designed to track. This is not background noise. This is a system in motion. To understand the scale of what scientists are now confronting, you have to begin 6 months before the first earthquake. You have to go back to July 2024. Because the crisis that terrified Greece in January 2025 did not begin in January. It began months earlier, in silence, beneath an island full of tourists sipping wine above a caldera. In July 2024, instruments at GPS monitoring stations on Santorini recorded something subtle. The island was swelling. Centimeter by centimeter, the surface was pushing upward. Satellite interferometry confirmed it. The Santorini caldera was inflating slowly as magma crept from the middle crust up into a shallow reservoir below the island. No earthquakes, no visible signs, no public announcement. No one noticed. The system was pressurizing for 6 full months before the first crack. Then, on January 27, 2025, at 1900 UTC, the seafloor northeast of Santorini began to shake. A low-magnitude tremor. Barely felt at first, but within an hour, instruments were registering something different. Not the isolated pop of a single fault. A swarm. A relentless, multiplying cascade of seismic events that intensified through the night. By midnight, more than 150 small quakes had struck. By the following morning, the number was in the thousands. Within 30 days, instruments had recorded more than 28,000 seismic events. The strongest exceeded magnitude 5.0. Buildings cracked, glass rattled off shelves, and the question that hung over every government briefing, every emergency meeting, every conversation between scientists and civil protection officials was the same one. Was this tectonic or was it volcanic? The distinction is the difference between a geological tremor and the opening act of an eruption. The Greek government did not wait for a definitive answer. On February 6, 2025, a state of emergency was declared across Santorini and the surrounding islands. Schools closed in Santorini, Anafi, Ios, and Amorgos simultaneously. 11,000 residents evacuated. Rescue teams from the Greek EMAK unit deployed to the island. Authorities issued an advisory that had never been issued before in this region, one that captured just how uncertain and dangerous the moment felt. Drain your swimming pools. The weight of the water above foundations, they warned, could destabilize buildings if the shaking continued. 2/3 of the island's nearly 16,000 permanent residents fled. But tourists kept arriving. That detail is not a footnote. It is the clearest possible illustration of how invisible this threat remains to the world watching from a distance. An island under a state of emergency. An island from which thousands of residents were evacuating. And tourists were still walking off the ferries with luggage, still booking sunset dinner reservations, still photographing the caldera from the clifftops. A local real estate agent who asked not to be identified told journalists during that period that volcanic activity never enters the conversation when selling a property on the island. That is the world that Colombo operates in. A world that doesn't know it exists. For the scientists watching the data in real time, Those weeks were among the most tense in the modern history of Mediterranean volcanology. Because the earthquake swarm was doing something puzzling, the quakes were not clustering beneath Santorini. They were moving, migrating away from the island, northeast, offshore, into the Aegean. They clustered along a fault zone that did not sit beneath any volcano on the standard monitoring maps. Marius Isken, a geophysicist at the GFZ Helmholtz Center for Geosciences in Potsdam, Germany, and lead author of the Nature study, described the uncertainty directly. There was a probability, he said, that the magma would reach the surface offshore, which meant there was a possibility of explosive activity. Not a certainty, not a guarantee, but a real, instrument-confirmed probability. The implication? A volcanic eruption in shallow open water, 7 kilometers from one of the most photographed islands on Earth. What saved the analysis was timing. Just weeks before the crisis began, the Multi-Marex project, a German-Greek interdisciplinary research initiative, had deployed a fresh set of ocean-bottom sensors inside Colombo's crater. Not near the crater, inside it. Placed on the seafloor directly above the volcanic reservoir, measuring both seismic signals and pressure changes in real time. Those instruments had been in place for less than a month when the swarm began. Without them, the most important discovery of this crisis would never have been made. And Jens Carstens, marine geophysicist at GeoMar and co-lead author of the study, was there. Not in Kiel, not in a control room in Germany. He was in Santorini, on the island, for routine follow-up fieldwork, sitting in a hotel room above a system that was fracturing beneath him. Every 6 hours, he received artificial intelligence-processed seismic data sent by his colleague Isken. An AI pipeline, designed at the GFZ using a model called PhaseNet, was automatically analyzing the incoming swarm data, detecting and locating thousands of earthquakes per day with a precision that no human team could match manually. From a hotel room on Santorini, a scientist watched 300 million cubic meters of magma move through the crust of the Earth in near real time. Let that image settle. Every 6 hours, Carstens received a new update. Every 6 hours, the picture got clearer and more alarming. If you want to be the kind of person who gets the update before everyone else, subscribe now. Because this story is still moving underground, and so is this channel. Because what those instruments and that AI confirmed is the discovery that the February 2026 GeoMar study published this week as definitive. A sheet of magma, a dike, had begun propagating laterally through the mid-crust starting at 18 kilometers depth. Not from beneath Santorini, from beneath Colombo, the hidden volcano, the submarine seamount sitting 7 kilometers offshore that barely registers on most hazard maps and almost no one in the general public can identify by name. That dike grew to 13 kilometers in length. To put that distance in human terms, it is the length of Manhattan from its southern tip to Harlem. A blade of molten rock, 13 kilometers long, forcing its way through ancient stone, fracturing layers of crust, reactivating old faults, generating 28,000 earthquakes as it moved. It carried approximately 300 million cubic meters of magma. It stalled at 4 kilometers beneath the seafloor. This time. But what happened to both volcanoes simultaneously as that dike moved is the revelation that the science had never documented before in a system like this. As the dike propagated, the ocean bottom sensors recorded what volcanologists described as the smoking gun. The seafloor above Colombo's magma chamber sank. 30 centimeters, the chamber was deflating, draining its own magma supply into the dike as it advanced. And at the same moment, Santorini also began to subside. The inflation that had been building since July 2024 reversed. The island sank back down. Both volcanoes, simultaneously, responded to the same movement from the same source. Scientists interpret this as proof of a previously unknown hydraulic connection between Santorini and Colombo at depth. 2 separate volcanoes, 2 separate craters. 2 volcanoes that all prior models treated as largely independent systems. One shared magmatic heart. National Geographic described it in terms that are worth hearing directly. They are 2 aortas attached at depth to a hidden magmatic circulatory system. When that system moves, both of them move. When it drains, both of them sink. When it pressurizes, the earthquakes come. And when it pressurizes enough, something else entirely happens. This discovery has implications that reach far beyond Greece. Scientists note that shared and coupled magmatic plumbing systems are now suspected to exist beneath other major volcanic fields around the world. Hawaii, Iceland, the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. If two volcanoes as close and as well studied as Santorini and Colombo maintained a hidden deep connection that went unconfirmed until a crisis made it visible, then the same situation almost certainly exists at other sites where the instruments have not yet been deployed and where the crisis has not yet arrived. The science of volcano monitoring just changed. Because the old model assumed you watch the visible volcano. The 2025 crisis proved that the trigger can come from a different volcano entirely. Now consider what scientists already knew about Colombo before January 2025 even started. In October 2022, a team from Imperial College London published a landmark study using a technique called full waveform inversion. Think of it as a medical ultrasound applied to the Earth's crust. Instead of imaging tissue and bone, it images seismic wave velocities passing through rock. Where velocities slow down dramatically, you are looking at fluid. You are looking at melt. You are looking at magma. The Imperial College team used this technique on Colombo's subsurface and produced the highest resolution image ever taken of what lies beneath the seamount. What they found inside that image was a magma chamber that no prior survey had detected. A body of 1.4 cubic kilometers of mobile melt, sitting between 2 to 4 kilometers below the seafloor, growing at 4 million cubic meters per year since the last eruption in 1650. The researchers noted something critical about that growth rate. It is large enough to counteract the effects of cooling and crystallization. The magma is not just sitting there slowly hardening. It is accumulating faster than it can solidify. The chamber is genuinely growing. At that rate, within 150 years, Colombo's magma chamber will return to the volume it held just before the 1650 eruption. The eruption breached the sea surface and exploded into open air. The eruption generated a tsunami that crashed across the Aegean with wave run-up heights of 20 meters on the southern coast of Ios. Inundation reached 240 meters inland on the island of Mykonos. Flooding covered up to 2 square kilometers of the eastern coast of Santorini. An eruption killed at least 50 to 70 people, many of them from toxic gases released by the volcano before a single wave reached the shore. That eruption also built a volcanic cone the size of a small mountain in just 2 weeks. Eyewitness accounts from the 17th century describe it rising from the sea. Then it sank back beneath the waves and disappeared as if it had never existed. The researchers who published the 2022 Magma Chamber study described the style of a potential future eruption as comparable to Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai. Not a distant analogy, a direct comparison in mechanism and environment. Hunga Tonga was a shallow submarine volcano. Colombo is a shallow submarine volcano. Hunga Tonga generated a shockwave that circled the planet multiple times and was recorded by weather stations in every country on Earth. It triggered tsunamis that reached the shores of North America, Japan, and Peru from the South Pacific. It injected water vapor into the stratosphere at levels that disrupted global climate measurements. Colombo sits at 500 meters depth. The 2022 study stated explicitly that this shallow depth would significantly enhance the explosivity of any future eruption. The interface between magma and seawater at that depth creates conditions for what volcanologists call rhetomagmatic explosions, where seawater contacts molten rock and flashes violently into superheated steam, amplifying the force of the blast by orders of magnitude. And Colombo is not 10,000 kilometers from a population center. It is 7 kilometers from one. Now, layer in the human reality above this system. Santorini receives approximately 3.5 million tourists per year. The island has one main port. One primary road runs along the caldera rim. A resident population of nearly 16,000, spread across villages that cling to the inner walls of an ancient volcanic crater. There is no dedicated volcanic evacuation infrastructure designed for a Colombo origin event. The emergency plans that existed in January 2025, the ones that guided the state of emergency declaration and the school closures and the pool draining advisories, were not written with Colombo in mind as the primary trigger. They were written with Santorini's visible surface system as the reference point. The 2025 crisis revealed that the primary trigger may not come from that system at all. It may come from 7 kilometers offshore, from a volcano most of the world has never heard of, from a vent that sits below 500 meters of water, invisible from any beach, invisible from any cliff, invisible from any hotel terrace where someone is watching the sunset and thinking this is the most beautiful place they have ever seen. The hazard assessment published for Colombo in 2024 identified 4 categories of threat from a future eruption: toxic gases, ashfall, pyroclastic flows, and tsunami generation. All 4 of these occurred in 1650. All 4 are physically plausible again today. The toxic gas threat alone is particularly alarming in the context of a tourist population that has no baseline awareness that a submarine volcano even exists nearby. In 1650, people on Santorini died from volcanic gas before the first wave arrived. They did not know where the gas was coming from because they could not see the source. That situation has not changed. The northwestern flank of Colombo carries an additional threat that the 2025 crisis did not trigger, but did not eliminate. Studies of the 1650 eruption have established that approximately 1.2 cubic kilometers of Colombo's northwestern flank underwent a massive downward movement during that event, dropping 500 to 1,000 meters along a basal detachment surface. That flank collapse depressurized the magma system and directly triggered the explosive eruption that followed. Numerical tsunami simulations, published by Karstens and colleagues, showed that the historical eyewitness accounts of wave run-up heights can only be reproduced if the flank collapse and the eruption happened in sequence. The tsunami was not just caused by the explosion. It was caused by the collapse of a volcano's own wall into the sea first. That flank is still there. And the 2025 dike intrusion confirmed that this system is actively moving. The mid-crustal reservoir beneath Colombo is connected to the dike pathway that already ran to within 4 kilometers of the seafloor. The dike stalled because it ran out of momentum and buoyancy, but the reservoir is still being replenished from below. The February 2026 GeoMar study confirmed this explicitly. Gas flux measurements at Nia Kameni on Santorini remain elevated above 2024 baselines. Magma is still being supplied from depth. Both volcanoes are still replenishing. The feeding pulse that triggered 28,000 earthquakes has not reversed. It has paused. And then there is the deeper geological context that most coverage of Santorini never reaches. Because Colombo and Santorini do not sit in isolation. They sit within the Hellenic volcanic arcs, a 1,500-kilometer chain of volcanoes created by the subduction of the African plate beneath the Eurasian plate. The arc runs through some of the most densely populated and most seismically active terrain in the world. In 1956, 2 earthquakes of magnitude 7.4 and 7.2 struck the southern Aegean Sea between Santorini and Amorgos, just 13 minutes apart, and triggered a tsunami. In 1600 BCE, the Minoan eruption of the Santorini caldera, one of the largest volcanic events of the entire Holocene, reshaped the Mediterranean, generated tsunamis that devastated coastlines across the eastern basin, and contributed to the collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete. Scientists estimate the total volume of material ejected at approximately 60 cubic kilometers. The ash fallout reached Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. That eruption was from the same caldera system that Santorini's villages now ring. The deep geological pipes beneath this region are not quiet. They have never been quiet. They produced one of the most catastrophic events in human prehistory. They produced the 1,650 Colombo tsunami. They produced the 1,956 earthquake pair. They produced the 28,000 earthquake swarm of 2025. And they are currently producing, at a rate of 4 million cubic meters per year, the next chapter of what this system is capable of. Now return to the February 17, 2026 GeoMar study, published this week, and consider what it confirms in full. Two factors made the level of detail in this study possible. The first was the AI pipeline developed at GFZ, called QSeek, built on the PhaseNet machine learning model, capable of automatically detecting and precisely locating thousands of earthquakes per day in real time. Without AI, the resolution of the earthquake catalog would have been too coarse to reconstruct the dike's path through the crust with the precision the study achieved. The second was the multi-Merix ocean bottom sensors deployed inside Colombo's crater in early January 2025, just days before the crisis began. Those sensors recorded the seismic signals and the pressure drop as the seafloor above the deflating reservoir compressed downward by up to 32 centimeters. If the multi-Merix deployment had been scheduled for March instead of January, those sensors would not have been there. The connection between the two volcanoes might not have been detected. The definitive analysis published this week might have concluded that the 2025 crisis was a complex tectonic event with volcanic overtones, not the first confirmed real-time observation of a coupled magmatic system producing a lateral dike injection between two explosive volcanoes. The most important volcanic discovery in this region in decades was separated from scientific invisibility by a matter of weeks. There are currently 8 GeoMar seabed sensor platforms operating in the Santorini-Colombo region tonight. GFZ is conducting ongoing gas and temperature measurements on Santorini's surface. Satellite interferometry continues to monitor ground deformation across the caldera and the surrounding seafloor. The Santori Observatory, the Santorini Seafloor Volcanic Observatory, is moving toward full operational status, a network of permanent underwater instruments designed to provide continuous monitoring of Colombo's activity across all relevant parameters simultaneously. But here is what that monitoring architecture does not change. The 1.4 cubic kilometers of magma already confirmed inside Colombo's chamber in 2022 has continued growing. The deep reservoir that fed the 2025 dike is still being replenished from the mantle. The flank that collapsed in 1650 is still there. The 3.5 million tourists who pass through Santorini every year still do not know that a volcano sits 7 kilometers offshore. The real estate market on Santorini still does not factor volcanic risk into property conversations, and the world's hazard maps still do not show Colombo with the same warning colors as the volcanoes people can see. The volcanologist Paraskevi Nomikou grew up in Santorini. She is one of the lead researchers on the Colombo monitoring effort and a co-author of the studies that have redefined what we understand about this system. She remembers her grandfather and great-grandfather telling her, from the time she was a child, that the volcano to fear was not the one you could see. The visible caldera of Santorini, they said, was not the real danger. The danger was the one hiding beneath the water. Gradually, over years of research, diving expeditions, acoustic surveys, and the deployment of instruments no previous generation of scientists had access to, she came to understand exactly what they meant. Her grandfather was right. Colombo has been silent for 375 years. But silence, the data now confirms at the highest level of scientific certainty available, is not inactivity. The crater floor of Colombo holds active hydrothermal vents. It holds sulfide chimneys 6 meters tall, precipitating gold and silver from superheated fluid rising from the volcanic rock below. The conditions at the bottom of Colombo's crater so closely resemble what scientists expect to find on the ocean moons of Jupiter and Saturn that NASA sent an expedition there in 2019 to test deep space exploration vehicles in an extraterrestrial analog environment. The agency described the inside of Colombo's crater as an ocean with life that may resemble what exists on other planets. NASA sent submarines here to prepare for other worlds. If that detail alone doesn't deserve a like on this video, nothing does. That crater is alive. The system feeding it is alive. The connection to Santorini is alive and confirmed. And the magma that moved beneath the Aegean Sea in January 2025, 300 million cubic meters of it, pushing through 13 kilometers of fractured crust from a depth of 18 kilometers, stalling just 4 kilometers below the water, generating 28,000 earthquakes as it went, is the clearest signal this system has produced in 4 centuries. It was enough to shut down schools, enough to drain swimming pools, enough to evacuate 11,000 people, enough to trigger a state of emergency, enough to send a marine geophysicist to his hotel room to read AI-processed earthquake data every 6 hours while the ground shook beneath him. And it was not an eruption. It was not even close to the surface. It was a rehearsal. The question the February 2026 study does not answer, because no instrument yet built can answer it, is when the next movement begins. Whether the next dike will carry more volume, whether it will find a more direct pathway to the shallow seafloor, whether the flank above a deflating Colombo reservoir might begin to destabilize under the pressure changes that accompany a major injection. Whether the next crisis will give scientists the same weeks of AI-processed warning they had in 2025, or whether it will move faster, or from a different direction, along a pathway that current monitoring has not yet mapped. What the science can say, with the confidence of peer review and Nature publication, and the data from 28,000 earthquakes and 8 ocean bottom platforms and satellite interferometry and gas flux measurements and full waveform magma imaging, is this. 8 monitoring platforms are listening to the seafloor tonight. We want to know if you are listening too. Drop a comment. Did you know Colombo existed before this video? Because most people who visit Santorini still don't. This system is active. This system is coupled. This system is replenishing from depth. And this system sits beneath 3.5 million tourists who have never heard the name of the volcano that matters most. 8 monitoring platforms are operational on the seafloor tonight. The AI is processing. The gas readings are elevated. And scientists at GeoMar and GFZ and the University of Athens are watching, in near real time, for the next signal from a magmatic heart that the world has spent 375 years pretending was asleep. The only question is when it sends one they cannot stop.